My husband finally cut ties with his toxic mom and sister after they demanded we give up our home for his jobless sister and her family. Okay, so let me tell you about this crazy situation with my in-laws. Their relationship with my husband has been a total nightmare for me. Growing up, my husband, Jacob, was totally his mom's favorite. He was the golden child. Since his dad was always super busy with work, Jacob and his mom spent loads of time together. But I've noticed that his sister, Sarah, didn't get the same love from their mom. Even though I'm sure their mom loves both her kids, it's pretty clear she gives Jacob special treatment. I bet Sarah felt it too growing up, which is probably why Jacob has always tried to be the best big brother he could be for her. But things took a turn for the weird when I first started dating Jacob. Back then, he was fresh out of college and still living with his parents and Sarah. They had given him a whole floor to himself for privacy, which was cool because it meant I could come over and stay the night sometimes. But Sarah would randomly burst into our room in the mornings without knocking, catching us in, let's say, less than proper attire. She'd just start chatting with Jacob about the most random stuff, like it was totally normal. It was super awkward for me because I didn't really know her, and there I was in my lingerie. I get that it was their house, but is it really that hard to knock? I talked to Jacob about it and told him I wouldn't come over unless he put a lock on the door. He was on board with that idea. But, predictably, Sarah freaked out the next morning when she couldn't just waltz in. She started banging on the door, demanding to know why it was locked. Jacob eventually let her in, and she stormed in, pointing at me and shouting, "Is it because of this skank?" I was totally shocked at how rude she was. Jacob tried to explain that he just wanted some privacy and Sarah wasn't having any of it. She accused me of getting between them, which was a bit much for me. I'm usually not one to start a fight, so I just made an excuse to use the bathroom. I could hear them arguing, and when things finally calmed down, Jacob came to apologize and promised to talk to her about saying sorry to me too. The next weekend, Sarah did apologize, kind of, saying she needed to talk to Jacob urgently and thought it would be okay to come in. Jacob told her not to disturb us again, and she backed off, though not completely. That wasn't the end of her weird behavior, though. If Jacob and I dared to disagree about anything, even something silly like a movie, and Sarah was around, she'd jump right in, suggesting Jacob should date someone who shared his interests, implying we weren't right for each other. Jacob would give her a look, but she'd just smirk. She even asked me super personal questions when we were alone, like why my ex and I broke up, and made snarky comments about how Jacob's ex was prettier than me. It felt like she was testing me, trying to get under my skin. I kept quiet for a while, but I eventually snapped. I told her I liked my ex's family better than Jacob's because they weren't nosy or overbearing. That shut her up, at least for a bit. And then there's my mother-in-law. When I first met Jacob, she basically ignored me. But once she realized we were serious, she started acting like I was trying to steal her son. She would ignore me at family dinners and act like I didn't exist. Jacob noticed sometimes and tried to talk to her, but she never changed her tune. She even called me stuck up and spoiled because my parents sent me to private school while she taught at a public school. I also found out she tried to convince Jacob not to marry me, telling him he should find someone better. Thankfully, Jacob didn't care about her opinion and proposed to me anyway, but dealing with her and Sarah has been a lot. So, I was honestly floored to hear that Jacob had proposed, and then both of them reached out to me, hating on the decision. They said it was a terrible move and urged me to break things off and give the ring back. Honestly, I found their request super strange and told them they were stepping way over the line. I mean, I loved Jacob and wanted to be with him forever. Once they realized they couldn't sway me, Jacob's mom reluctantly changed her tune, telling me I should try to be the best wife and take care of him just like she did. I was a bit offended but tried not to overthink her comments. Meanwhile, Sarah was on a whole different level, calling me a gold digger and saying her brother deserves someone more prestigious. She even threatened to blow up my spot before the wedding to make sure Jacob wouldn't marry me. So, I immediately filled Jacob in on everything that went down. He was pretty shocked by how rude they were being. Even after he stood up for me, they still thought I was the wrong choice for him. Jacob told me to ignore them and reassured me that he loved me no matter what they thought. Despite his comforting words, it still sucked that his family wasn't on board with me. We had already planned to pay for our wedding ourselves, so when his mom offered to pitch in half, we politely turned her down, explaining how hard we'd saved for this big day. Instead of being happy for us, she got even more upset, whining to Jacob about how sad she was that he didn't need her anymore. On the bright side, Jacob's dad was totally cool with us and had no problems at all, unlike his wife and daughter. Since his mom wouldn't stop complaining, we compromised by letting her organize the rehearsal dinner, which she agreed to do, and we appreciated it. But as the wedding got closer, things took a wild turn. Sarah invited herself over for dinner, saying she missed Jacob. We were living on our own by then, so we figured she genuinely wanted to hang out with her brother. I was hesitant but didn't want to be rude, so I agreed. During dinner, Sarah randomly started going off about cheating partners, saying they were worthless. We were all confused about where she was going with this, and then out of the blue, she called me a worthless piece of trash, accusing me of cheating with my coworker, Zach. Both Jacob and I were baffled, especially when she whipped out photos of me and Zach, claiming she had caught me red-handed. I knew I hadn't cheated, so I was curious why she thought I had. The pictures were totally innocent. Zach and I were coworkers who started at the same time and helped each other out a lot. Jacob even knew Zach had a girlfriend. Sarah was trying to spin these harmless photos into something they weren't, just to mess up what Jacob and I had. I was annoyed by her false accusations, as it was clear she was trying to ruin my rep and our relationship. Before I had the chance to defend myself, Jacob, clearly upset, stepped in and asked Sarah why she was stalking and snapping pics of me and my coworkers without consent. She tried to justify it by saying she was just looking out for Jacob and was afraid I was marrying him for his money. Jacob shot down her accusations, telling her she was making drama out of nothing. I also tried to explain that we were just coworkers, but she kept pushing her narrative. As things heated up, I finally had enough and told her I'd file a police report for her stalking and unauthorized photography. Her face changed when she realized how serious I was. She got worried about her career and started begging Jacob to talk me out of it. I firmly told her she could save herself this time. When she asked what I wanted, I said I'd drop the complaint if she promised to stay out of my life. So, here's how it all started with Sarah. Things were going south, and she had no other choice but to rely on her brother, Jacob, for some backup. But surprise, surprise, Jacob decided to stand up for me instead. He told Sarah she should be thankful I was ready to move past her major blunder. Reluctantly, Sarah agreed to keep her distance, and to be honest, we haven't exchanged a single word since that day. Jacob still keeps in touch with her, but she's been ghosting me. Fast forward to our wedding rehearsals. Right before our big day, at the rehearsal dinner, my mother-in-law took over the planning with complete authority, refusing any help from us. She was confident she'd handle it all. Unfortunately, when we showed up, it was a whole different scene from what we pictured. It was all plastic tablecloths on picnic tables with chili and Mexican food, which, let's just say, wasn't exactly the vibe we were going for. My mother-in-law was visibly upset the entire evening, which killed the party mood. She drank more than she should have and started acting up, ranting about how she couldn't wait for the wedding to be over and how stressful it was, even though she hadn't lifted a finger to help or chip in financially. Finally, her husband, my father-in-law, lost his patience and took her aside. Sarah tried to justify her behavior, but he wasn't having any of it. As you can imagine, the whole thing was a mess, and I started worrying that my mother-in-law and Sarah might ruin the wedding. That night, Jacob and I had our first big argument. I demanded he uninvite Sarah and his mom because I was convinced they'd try to steal the spotlight at our wedding. Jacob was mad at first, promising his dad would keep them in check. I was firm, if he didn't uninvite them, there'd be no wedding. Jacob was shocked, and despite feeling a bit harsh, I was seriously worried about being embarrassed in front of everyone. In the end, Jacob saw my point. He called his dad first thing in the morning to say his mom and Sarah were uninvited. His dad, Phil, seemed prepared for this and assured Jacob they wouldn't show up unannounced. Soon after, my mother-in-law and Sarah bombarded Jacob with calls, trying to persuade him. But Jacob stood firm, telling them he didn't feel right having them there after everything they'd done. My mother-in-law accused me of being a bad influence, trying to drive a wedge between her and Jacob, while Sarah argued with him too. I felt bad for Phil missing the wedding because of his wife and kids, and a bit guilty about my ultimatum. But all that guilt evaporated when Jacob's cousin spilled the beans. Apparently, Sarah and my mother-in-law had plotted to wear white dresses to the wedding, encouraging other women in their family WhatsApp group to do the same. I was blown away by how far they'd go to mess with me. After learning this, I was relieved they weren't invited. Jacob missed them but got why I was upset. The wedding turned out beautifully, with no drama upstaging us. Since then, my mother-in-law and Sarah have cut me off completely, which suits me just fine. They only invite Jacob to their gatherings, which doesn't bother me. Phil, on the other hand, has been a sweetheart, and we've kept in touch. Fast forward to a happier chapter, Jacob and I scrimped and saved enough to buy our first home this year. We were over the moon to own something so special. His family and Sarah visited for a low-key housewarming, but I took the chance to hang out with my folks instead. Then out of the blue last month, my mother-in-law gave me a ring. This was a shocker because we hadn't spoken since Jacob and I tied the knot. Out of nowhere, she struck up a convo about how life was going. I was caught off guard by her sudden interest but kept it friendly. Then she asked how it felt living in such a big house with just Jacob. Her words stung because Jacob and I had been struggling with infertility for ages. We had come to terms with perhaps never having kids after grieving the idea for some time. I even told Jacob he could leave me if he wanted to start a family with someone else, but bless him, he stuck by me, assuring me being childless was okay as long as we had each other. Our families knew about our struggles, which made her comment hit even harder. Then she dropped the bombshell. Sarah was pregnant again, her 6th time. I was gobsmacked. Jacob had shared how Sarah's husband was out of work, not into contraception, and pretty much led to these surprise pregnancies. The guy was a couch potato, leaving everything to Sarah, who juggled multiple jobs while he gamed his days away. No help, no bills paid, nada. Jacob told me how he treated Sarah like a maid. Even with everyone talking to her, nothing changed. So, there I was, just chilling when my mother-in-law dropped this bombshell on me. She started talking about how Sarah, her daughter, couldn't work because she was pregnant and out of nowhere suggested that Jacob and I should give up our apartment. Apparently, it was way too big for just the two of us, and Sarah and her family deserved more space. I was completely floored, like, wait, are you serious right now? But nope, she was dead serious. She mentioned Sarah and her hubby could just move in with us since her own house didn't have room for them. I was trying to keep calm, but inside I was like, this is nuts. I told her, look, this is our house. We're still paying it off, and you can't just decide someone else can move in. She said she'd already talked to Jacob, and he was supposedly cool with it. That was super weird because Jacob and I always tell each other everything, and I knew he wouldn't have agreed to this without us discussing it first. I made it clear that no one was moving in without both of us agreeing. Sure, Sarah and her hubby could crash for a weekend or something, but not, like, forever. Then she starts yelling, saying it's my duty as a daughter-in-law to make room for Sarah and all would be forgiven if I just go with her plan. At this point, I was pretty irritated, so I sarcastically said, sure, they can take our place, but, you know, we're still paying for it. Maybe if you pitch in with the mortgage, we can talk. Oh, and since you only have one job, you might need another one to cover the costs. This made her even angrier, and she blew up, saying it was ridiculous for her to pay our mortgage, which I thought was just as laughable as her expecting us to fully support Sarah's family. She hung up on me when she realized I wasn't budging. Soon after, Sarah called, all upset, telling me off for suggesting her mom should pay our mortgage. She called me a gold digger, and I shot back, saying she was the one trying to freeload. If she wants to know who the real gold digger is, she should take a good look at her partner who's not pulling any weight. That shut her up. I told Sarah she could argue all day, but unless they helped with the bills, they weren't moving in. She accused me of being all about the money, but honestly, I felt pretty good for standing my ground and not letting them walk all over me. Still, I logged into Reddit to see if maybe I was the bad guy here. Update 1, thanks for everyone's support. People keep asking why my mother-in-law would even think this was okay. Well, she's always been super entitled. My husband has put up with her nonsense for too long, and we really need to have a serious talk about it. It's sad that she would lie about her own son to get her way. Sarah's kind of caught in the crossfire, doing whatever her mom says, hoping to stay in her good books. But in this case, it would mean we pay all her bills while her husband does nothing. I'm waiting for Jacob to get back from his trip so we can talk this out face to face. Update 2, it's been a few days, but Jacob finally got home. I filled him in on everything, and he was totally shocked. Apparently, all his mom had told him before he left was that Sarah was pregnant, no mention of her crazy demands. I told him straight up that he needed to deal with his mom because I was at my wit's end. He agreed and confronted her. She tried to backtrack, saying she hadn't exactly lied, just assumed that he wouldn't mind Sarah staying with us. What a mess. So, this all started when my mother-in-law decided to take things into her own hands and came up to me directly. Jacob, my husband, stopped her and asked why she assumed he'd be okay with Sarah and her whole clan moving in with us. My mother-in-law tried to explain that since Jacob and Sarah were pretty tight, he'd naturally want to support her by letting her whole family crash at our place. I was silently fuming inside but kept quiet, letting Jacob deal with his mom. Jacob laid it out for her, saying there was no way he'd let Sarah, her jobless hubby, and their 6 kids move in. He reminded her that she couldn't just decide we had to take care of them. My mother-in-law got all riled up, yelling about how Sarah desperately needed help. But Jacob wasn't having it. He said it wasn't our responsibility and suggested if she wanted to help Sarah so much, she should take them in herself. When she mentioned Phil didn't want them in their tiny house and hinted that since I didn't have kids, taking care of Sarah's would make me feel fulfilled, my eyes just about popped out of my head. But Jacob lost it. He blew up, saying she had no right to talk like that about me and couldn't guilt me into looking after Sarah's kids. Jacob went on to say that Phil didn't want anything to do with Sarah since she just kept having kids left and right and that he'd had enough of the both of them. My mother-in-law tried to backpedal, but Jacob stood his ground. He told her that he'd tried keeping a good relationship with them even after they disrespected me again and again, but he was done. She tried to plead with him, but Jacob made it clear this was our home and I was his wife. Disrespecting me meant disrespecting him too, and he wasn't going to stand for it. He ended the call with those final words, and since then, he hasn't talked to either Sarah or his mom. Phil, Jacob's dad, called him up, and after hearing everything, he got why Jacob had to be so firm. Phil even apologized to me for his wife's antics, but I told him not to worry about it. A couple of weeks later, lots of folks advised me to install cameras around our place just in case my mother-in-law and Sarah decided to show up and cause trouble, so I did just that. And wouldn't you know it, they turned up banging on my door last weekend while I was alone. I saw them through the camera and called Jacob right away, and he said he was on his way. When I opened the door, there they were, both looking furious. They wanted to come in, but I told them nope, if they had anything to say, they could do it from out there. My mother-in-law started going off on me, calling me selfish and greedy, but I calmly told her this was our home and they weren't welcome inside without an invite. She kept ranting, not knowing that our cameras were catching everything on tape. I reminded her of our previous talk and made it clear that I wasn't going to give up our home for Sarah and her kids, and if she had more to say, she could wait for Jacob. Then Sarah started yelling, accusing me of tearing the family apart, being a gold digger, and trying to take Jacob away from them. I let them know everything they said was being recorded and that I'd use the footage for a restraining order if needed. They both were shocked, and my mother-in-law was like, "You wouldn't dare." I just smirked and said if they didn't leave, they'd be getting legal papers soon. That seemed to worry them, and Sarah tried to say I was overreacting, that it wasn't a big deal. Luckily, Jacob showed up just then. He casually asked them what they were doing there. My mother-in-law tried to hug him, but he wasn't having any of it and demanded to know why they came. Sarah accused me of trying to control his life, but Jacob told them again that avoiding them was his decision, and he didn't want anything to do with them anymore. My mother-in-law begged for forgiveness, but Jacob just told them to leave or he'd call the cops. They were totally taken aback, clearly not expecting that from him. Jacob said if they ever showed up again, he'd have them removed by the police. They left upset, but Jacob was over it. I was so relieved that my husband finally had my back. Jacob later talked to Phil, who was as shocked as us that his wife and Sarah had shown up unannounced. Phil agreed we did the right thing by not letting them in and was disgusted by their behavior. With Jacob being so firm about his decision, I don't think they'll try to come back. If they do, I'll be calling a lawyer. I'm just glad Jacob finally saw how toxic his family could be, and I hope this is the last we hear of it. I'm ready to move on and live our lives peacefully. Thanks for listening, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more crazy real-life stories happening around you.